The cabin had descended into a frenzy of chaos and dread, the kind of fear that felt primal, raw, and unfiltered, the sound of it ringing in her ears like a relentless wave. People clung to one another, eyes wild, breaths sharp and uneven as the giant machine that carried them lurched again, shuddering as though some invisible hand were shaking it violently. The oxygen masks swayed above their heads, useless for comfort, merely another reminder that survival was suddenly no guarantee. She pressed her face back against the window of 13F, heart hammering, as the rogue jet pulled into view once again, this time so close she could see the metal panels along its wings vibrating from the speed. It was like staring into the eyes of a predator circling prey, and she couldn't look away. She had thought at first that it was recklessness, then perhaps mechanical failure, but now there was no question. This was deliberate. Every swoop, every near miss, every bone-rattling maneuver screamed of intent. Someone wanted to terrify them. Someone wanted to control them. Or worse, someone wanted to end them. A child cried out 3 rows ahead, the sound piercing through the cacophony, and it jolted her back into the reality that these weren't just abstract fears or theories. These were lives, hundreds of them, dangling by a thread. Her own included. She imagined her name scrolling across news tickers, the headline written in cold, detached text, "Passenger flight collides mid-air in tragic disaster." Her chest tightened until it hurt. She couldn't let that be the ending, not for herself, not for the strangers around her who had become unwilling fellow travelers in this nightmare. Her eyes flicked toward the cockpit door at the front of the plane again, the heavy, locked barrier that stood between them and answers. For the first time, she saw a shadow move behind it, quick, sharp, deliberate. The pilots were working, struggling, fighting to keep control. She could feel it in the way the plane pitched, in the way every second stretched into eternity. But were they winning? Or were they merely delaying the inevitable? Suddenly, alarms blared faintly through the cabin, shrill, mechanical sounds that didn't come from the passenger's side but from up front, muted by the door yet loud enough to chill the blood of anyone who heard them. The passengers reacted instantly, the sound triggering deeper panic. Screams rose again, questions shouted into the air with no answers given. She gripped the seat in front of her, pulling herself forward slightly, straining to listen. Her mind raced with fragments of aviation documentaries she had half-watched before, snatches of information about collision avoidance systems, warnings that blared only when impact was dangerously close. Her heart dropped. That was what they were hearing. The pilots were in a life-or-death battle against a jet that refused to give them space. And worst of all, the other jet seemed to know exactly where they were heading, as if shadowing them with cruel precision. The plane dipped again, eliciting another wave of screams. This time, the oxygen masks did fall, dropping with a sudden jerk that sent them swaying ominously above the passengers' heads. The flight attendants scrambled to maintain order, their voices loud and urgent now, no longer hiding the edge of panic. "Please, remain seated. Secure your masks if necessary. Stay calm." Calm was impossible. The cabin was a storm of noise, shouts, sobs, frantic prayers whispered into trembling hands. People clutched each other, reaching across aisles, desperate for comfort in the face of the unknown. She, however, was locked in place, her trembling fingers gripping the armrest so tightly her knuckles were white. Her gaze burned into the glass, because deep inside she felt an almost terrifying certainty: the other jet wasn't finished. For a heartbeat, there was silence. A fragile, unnatural stillness. And then, there it was again. The jet appeared directly alongside them, matching their speed, its sleek body gleaming menacingly in the sunlight. Gasps rippled through the cabin as dozens of passengers now pressed against windows, unable to deny it anymore. Some shouted incoherent words, others simply cried. She could feel the collective terror rise like a tide, washing over everyone at once. The image was surreal, two massive machines suspended in the sky, one a vessel of civilians clinging to hope, the other a predator circling far too close. She locked eyes on the cockpit of the rogue jet, her heart seizing as she thought she saw movement inside. The tiniest shadow of a figure, helmeted or hooded, she couldn't be sure. But the unmistakable sense lingered: whoever was inside the jet knew exactly what they were doing. The captain's voice returned, but now it was shouting urgent commands meant for his crew but bleeding through the intercom. "Brace! Brace! Panic ignited fully. People screamed, fumbling to cover their heads, the sound of crying children mingling with the thud of luggage breaking free from overhead compartments. She pressed her head down, arms wrapped over herself, but her eyes still flicked toward the window, unable to look away. In that moment, seat 13F no longer felt like just another seat, it felt like the cursed spotlight, the place where the truth had been revealed first, the vantage point that made her the unwilling witness to a skyborne nightmare. And as the jet tilted again, swooping dangerously close, she realized something chilling: this wasn't going to stop until someone did something. And she wasn't sure if the crew, or anyone else, was capable of that. And then it happened, the moment she thought might be the last. The rogue jet swooped directly across their nose, so close the entire cabin shook with a thunderous vibration. People screamed, some praying out loud, others simply crying into their hands. For a single frozen second, she locked eyes with it again, and in the cockpit of that smaller, faster aircraft, she swore she saw a figure turn its head deliberately, almost as if to look at her, to acknowledge her presence in 13F. It wasn't random anymore. It wasn't just chance that she had seen it first, that she had been the one to notice its patterns. It felt personal. As insane as it sounded, it felt like whoever was inside that jet wanted her to know, wanted her to see. The captain's voice exploded over the intercom, no longer calm or measured, but urgent, commanding, "Brace! Brace! Brace!" The cabin filled with frantic movements as passengers obeyed, covering their heads, clutching their knees, pressing into their seats with sobs and shouts. She followed too, though her eyes kept flicking back up, desperate to witness, unwilling to surrender her view even as her body curled forward. The jet dove again, and for one sickening heartbeat, she thought impact was inevitable, that fire and metal would tear them apart mid-air. But then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it pulled away, vanishing into the endless horizon. Gone. Silence crashed down like a weight, broken only by ragged breathing, muffled cries, and the faint creak of the aircraft as it steadied once more. The passengers hesitated, waiting for the next strike, the next lurch, but it never came. Minutes passed, long, agonizing minutes, until the captain's voice returned, trembling but steady enough to carry authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have just experienced a serious airspace violation. The situation is now under control. We are diverting immediately to the nearest airport. Remain calm. We are safe." Safe. The word felt foreign, unreal. Was it true? She didn't know. Her body remained rigid, every muscle locked, her gaze fixed stubbornly on the window of 13F, half expecting the rogue jet to reappear at any moment. But it didn't. The horizon remained empty, only clouds and sky and the distant curve of the earth beneath them. The predator had vanished. When the plane finally descended, landing with a shudder on the nearest runway, the cabin erupted in tears and applause, passengers releasing the fear they had bottled up for what felt like hours. But she couldn't join them. She sat frozen, her body trembling, her eyes still scanning the sky beyond the airport. Because deep down, she knew something the others didn't. That jet hadn't been a random intruder. It hadn't been a mistake. Whoever was inside had chosen them, had chosen that flight, and for reasons she couldn't understand, had chosen her to witness it. Seat 13F was no accident. And though the nightmare seemed over, she couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't the end at all. You never know when an ordinary flight, a simple seat number like 13F, could turn into a story that feels ripped straight out of a thriller. She wasn't famous, she wasn't a VIP, she wasn't even someone the crew remembered by name at first. She was just another passenger boarding a long flight, tucking her small bag into the overhead bin and sliding into the narrow seat by the window. The kind of person who blends into the background, invisible among dozens of travelers, each with their own stories. Yet, what unfolded at 30,000 feet would ensure that no one ever forgot her again. Before I tell you exactly how a quiet flight became a near disaster and why her presence in that particular seat would change everything, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because the twists and turns in stories like these are too good to miss, and you'll want to stay with us until the end. Now picture this. The cabin hums with that low vibration you only hear on planes, the steady thrum of engines that is oddly comforting when everything is normal. People shuffle around for legroom, flight attendants smile as they secure trays, and the safety briefing drones in the background as most passengers scroll on their phones. She sits quietly, her gaze fixed on the clouds that have started to roll past like white waves against the blue canvas of sky. She doesn't yet know that in less than an hour, her name, her seat, will be repeated in hushed voices over radios, that the passengers in rows around her will glance her way as if she were no longer anonymous. She doesn't know that fate is about to push her into a moment where seconds matter more than hours, and where she alone seems to notice what others have missed. The seatbelt sign flicks off, chatter rises, coffee cups clink, and life continues like every other flight, until something catches her eye. At first, it seems like nothing. A flicker of light, a shimmer against the horizon. But the longer she stares, the more her stomach knots. Because through the window of seat 13F, she sees something no one else has noticed yet, a shadow moving too fast, far too close, closing in at a speed that makes her skin prickle. Her first instinct was to tell herself it was nothing, just the reflection of sunlight bouncing off another plane somewhere far away, the kind of optical illusion you sometimes get when staring too long at the horizon. But this didn't feel like that. Her pulse quickened as she pressed her forehead against the cool plastic of the window and squinted. The shimmer wasn't fading. In fact, it was growing clearer, more defined. The sharp outline of wings, a fuselage gleaming against the endless blue, and worst of all, the way it seemed to be drawing closer, not passing by at a safe altitude like normal air traffic. She blinked several times, rubbed her eyes, even shifted in her seat to see if it was just her angle. But no, the image remained. A jet was closing in, and at lightning speed. She thought about the sleepless night before, the rush through security, the chaotic morning she'd had. Maybe it was exhaustion. Yet, something deep inside told her it wasn't imagination. It was warning. She glanced toward the cockpit door at the front of the plane, that mysterious barrier between passengers and the people in control. Should she stand up? Should she go there? The rules against that were strict, and she'd seen enough headlines about passengers being restrained for less. Still, the thought of doing nothing gnawed at her, each second dragging like a weight. Then, suddenly, the aircraft shuddered ever so slightly, just enough to make the drinks in cups tremble and a few passengers glance up. It could have been turbulence. It probably was turbulence. But to her, it felt like confirmation. Something wasn't right, and seat 13F was the only window that had caught it first. She kept telling herself to stay calm, but her body betrayed her. Her palms were slick with sweat, and she could feel the rapid thumping of her heartbeat against her ribs like a drum too loud for anyone else not to hear. Every few seconds, her eyes darted back to the window, searching desperately for the jet she had seen. And though the horizon appeared empty now, the ghost of that image remained stamped behind her eyelids every time she blinked. She couldn't shake it, and that haunted persistence convinced her even more that she was right. Airplanes didn't just appear at those speeds unless something was dangerously off course. She leaned back in her seat, staring at the tiny fastened seatbelt sign glowing faintly above the rows, and wondered how fragile it all really was. Hundreds of souls trusting two engines, thin metal walls, and a handful of people they couldn't even see up front. The weight of it suddenly hit her. She wasn't just worrying about herself. If she was right, every single person on this flight was in danger. The minutes ticked by slowly, each second stretching like rubber. The attendants had just finished serving drinks, the clink of ice cubes still echoing faintly, when she felt it again, a subtle but unmistakable vibration through the floor beneath her shoes. She knew turbulence well enough, she had flown before. But this wasn't turbulence. This was more like a ripple, a disturbance that didn't belong. She shifted in her seat, looking around, and saw the businessman across the aisle pause, tilt his head, then shake it off. A teenage boy 2 rows ahead looked up from his video game console briefly, as if sensing something too, before sinking back into his screen. Most ignored it. Only she seemed locked in on the unspoken sense of wrongness hanging in the air. And then it happened again, another flicker outside her window. Her stomach lurched as she spotted movement, distant at first but fast approaching. It was the same jet, no mistake this time. A silver streak darting through the clouds at an angle that set every instinct in her body screaming. Her breath caught in her throat, and her fingers curled into fists on her lap as she tried to decide what to do. Should she press the call button and risk looking paranoid, or keep silent and hope someone else would notice? The thing was, the cabin atmosphere was completely calm. The man beside her in 13E was dozing, his headphones still in, mouth slightly open. Across the aisle, a mother was fussing with her toddler's toy, trying to keep the child from crying. Businessmen tapped away at laptops, flight attendants rolled carts with practiced grace, serving drinks with easy smiles. Not a single soul seemed aware that outside, in the thin air where seconds could mean life or death, something was wrong. She bit her lip and tried to steady her breathing, but the knot in her stomach only grew tighter. She thought about the countless stories she had skimmed in newsfeeds, near misses, air traffic control errors, times when two aircraft came closer than they ever should have. She remembered one headline about a collision averted by mere seconds, and suddenly the word seconds began pounding in her skull like a warning bell. She couldn't just sit there. She needed to say something. But what if she was wrong? What if she became that passenger, the one who causes a stir, the one people laugh about afterward for overreacting? And yet, deep down, her instincts screamed that she wasn't wrong. Her hand hovered over the call button above her head, but she froze again. The thought of drawing everyone's eyes on her, of the crew brushing her off with a polite smile, made her hesitate. She glanced back out the window. Her heart leapt into her throat. The other jet was even closer now, so close she could make out details of its paint, the faint letters on its side, the unnatural angle of its trajectory. This wasn't safe. This wasn't routine. She gasped softly, and the man beside her stirred slightly, opening one eye. "You okay?" he mumbled sleepily. She hesitated, then whispered, I think something's wrong out there." He frowned, rubbed his eyes, then leaned toward the window. But by the time he looked, the angle had shifted, the jet dipping just enough to slip below their line of sight. He saw nothing. With a shrug, he leaned back, dismissing her concern with the casual indifference of someone who hadn't seen what she had. "Just relax. It's probably another plane way below us," he muttered, already drifting back to sleep. Her chest tightened with frustration. She knew what she had seen. The image was burned into her mind, the nose of that jet cutting through the air, far too close, far too fast. She pressed her hand to the window as if touching it could ground her, as if she could somehow will the plane back into sight to prove she wasn't imagining things. But now it was gone, swallowed by the horizon. For a fleeting moment, she wondered if maybe she really was imagining it, if stress or fatigue was playing tricks on her. So close she could see the glint of the cockpit glass. The maneuver wasn't random. It wasn't careless. It was intentional. And in that split second, before it darted away again, she was sure she saw something chilling, the faint outline of another person staring back at her through its cockpit, as if acknowledging her. The scream that tore from her throat was drowned out by dozens of others as the aircraft jolted sideways again, pitching with a sharp angle that had every passenger grabbing desperately for something to hold. The cabin erupted into chaos, children cried, trays rattled to the floor, and a flight attendant barely caught herself before tumbling down the aisle. Gasps turned to shouts, voices overlapping in panic, the calm veneer shattered in a heartbeat. And yet, through all the noise, her gaze never wavered from the window of seat 13F. Because she saw it undeniably, indisputably. The jet cutting across their path once more, closer than ever, a metallic predator circling prey. This time, others saw it too. A man 3 rows back shouted, "What the hell is that?" A woman near the wing pressed both palms to the glass, crying out, "Oh my God, it's another plane." The illusion was gone. The turbulence excuse evaporated. The truth was clear, something, or someone, was stalking them in the skies. The intercom crackled sharply, the captain's voice now clipped, his tone strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, fasten your seatbelts immediately and remain calm. This is an air traffic situation, but we are in communication with control and taking all necessary precautions." His words, meant to soothe, only tightened the coil of fear winding through the cabin. Air traffic situation. No one had ever heard that phrase before. People exchanged wide-eyed glances, whispering questions, their faces pale in the dimmed cabin lights. Her stomach turned because she could hear the tremor in his voice, the way each word seemed carefully chosen, masking what he didn't dare reveal. This wasn't routine. This wasn't being handled. They were on their own. And in that moment, she realized something horrifying. If she hadn't been in 13F, if she hadn't seen the jet first and kept watching, no one might have noticed until it was too late. The man beside her was no longer skeptical. His face had drained of color, his jaw slack as he finally caught sight of the jet streaking by. "Jesus Christ," he whispered hoarsely, clutching the armrests like a lifeline. His earlier dismissiveness was gone, replaced by the raw terror of someone who had just realized the nightmare outside was real. She didn't gloat, didn't even think to. Fear consumed everything now. Her thoughts raced. Who was flying that jet? Why was it targeting them? Was it a rogue aircraft? A military drill gone wrong? A hijacking attempt from the outside instead of inside? Nothing made sense, yet everything pointed to intent. The maneuvers were too sharp, too close, too deliberate. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We are experiencing unexpected turbulence." Turbulence. The word rang hollow, a feeble mask for what she knew she had seen. This wasn't turbulence. This was collision narrowly avoided. But nobody else realized it. Not yet. Her hands trembled as she held onto the armrest, staring out at the vanishing streak of silver. A sick certainty washed over her. It wasn't gone. It would be back. And somehow, seat 13F had become the cursed vantage point where she alone would witness every second of it. Her body was buzzing with adrenaline, every nerve screaming for her to do something, yet she felt trapped, pinned down by both the seatbelt across her lap and the weight of disbelief around her. The announcement from the captain had momentarily soothed the other passengers. Voices returned, nervous chuckles spread, parents reassured children with quick pats on the arm. But to her, the words felt hollow, like a bandage slapped over a wound that was far deeper than anyone realized. She knew turbulence, she had lived through it before, and this wasn't turbulence. This was something else. Something intentional. She stared at the faint outline of the clouds outside, her reflection merging with the rolling white horizon, and kept replaying the image in her mind, the gleam of that jet, the unnatural tilt of its nose, the speed that no casual pass-by could ever account for. If she had imagined it once, fine. Twice, maybe. But 3 times? No. She wasn't wrong. And that conviction both terrified and empowered her. The minutes dragged on, the plane steady again, as if pretending nothing had happened. But the air felt charged, brittle, like the quiet before a storm. She noticed the smallest things, the way the steward at the front whispered into the intercom phone with his hand cupped around it. The faint lines of worry etched on a flight attendant's forehead before she smoothed them away with another practiced smile, the captain's voice cutting off too quickly at the end of his turbulence explanation, almost as if he didn't want passengers to hear something in the background. Others didn't notice. Why would they? Most people on flights are content to surrender control, trusting that the people in the cockpit, unseen but assumed competent, will handle everything. But she wasn't content anymore. Her gut screamed that something larger was at play. She thought of the countless accident reports she had read out of morbid curiosity, near misses where planes crossed too close, tragedies that unfolded because a warning wasn't acted upon in time. She shivered. Was she about to be part of one of those stories? Suddenly, she spotted it again, a flash at the corner of her eye, so quick she thought she might lose it if she blinked. But no, it was there. The jet, swooping low, then banking sharply upward in a maneuver that looked more like aggression than accident. She leaned forward, pressing her face to the glass, her breath fogging the pain. The other plane wasn't cruising peacefully. It was swerving, tilting, edging into their path. She nearly shouted, but fear clenched her throat. Instead, she reached up and slammed her hand on the call button. A soft chime rang above her row, and a flight attendant glanced over with polite expectation. The attendant's smile was calm, practiced, the kind of smile built to reassure nervous passengers, and that only fueled her frustration because this wasn't nerves, this was real. "Ma'am, can I help you?" the attendant asked, leaning slightly toward her. The woman in 13F lowered her voice but couldn't mask the urgency in her tone. "There's another plane out there," she said quickly. "It's close, too close." The attendant blinked, then shifted to glance out the window. But from her standing angle, the horizon appeared clear. Nothing but clouds and endless sky. The attendant's polite smile softened further, touched with pity. I understand flying can be stressful, ma'am. There are always planes sharing the skies, but air traffic control ensures safe distance. You don't need to worry. That calm, soothing voice felt like a slap. The passenger shook her head fiercely. No, you don't understand. I saw it. Twice now. It's coming close. The attendant hesitated, glanced again, then touched her shoulder lightly. Why don't I bring you some water, she suggested kindly, before moving away down the aisle. Humiliation flared hot in her chest, but stronger than that was panic. She wasn't being believed. She glanced around, but everyone else had already tuned back into their bubbles, sleeping, reading, chatting, oblivious. Even the man next to her shifted uncomfortably, clearly embarrassed by her outburst, as if he worried people would think he was associated with her paranoia. She clenched her fists in frustration. Why couldn't anyone else see? She turned back to the window, her face inches from the glass, and her heart stopped. The other jet wasn't a mirage. It was there again, closer than ever, streaking across their path so quickly she could almost see the rivets along its side. For a split second, her brain froze on the detail of its nose dipping downward, as if in deliberate movement, not mechanical error. She gasped loudly, enough for the drowsy man beside her to jolt upright in surprise. What now? He asked irritably, but she didn't even hear him. All she could see was death barreling toward them at impossible speed. The soundless scream inside her chest threatened to erupt, but before she could cry out, their own aircraft jolted violently, lurching sideways with a stomach-churning tilt. Passengers yelped in surprise, cups toppled, liquid splashing onto laps, and overhead bins rattled with the force. Gasps and murmurs spread instantly, dozens of heads swiveling toward the windows. The seatbelt sign blinked on again with a sharp ding, and a voice crackled over the intercom. Her breath caught as she realized she could now see markings more clearly, something painted on its tail. She squinted hard, her hand pressed flat against the window, straining for detail. But it vanished too quickly, cutting through a bank of clouds and disappearing once more. She sagged back into her seat, trembling. She wasn't hallucinating. She wasn't paranoid. This was real. And it was escalating. She whipped her head toward the aisle, searching for the attendant she had spoken to earlier, but they were gone, disappeared behind the curtain at the galley. For a brief moment, she considered unbuckling and storming up front, demanding answers. But a deep fear rooted her in place. Because a new thought had just sunk into her mind, heavier than all the others. What if this wasn't a near miss? What if it wasn't an accident at all? Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might tear from her chest. She scanned the cabin frantically, gauging reactions. A few passengers still looked unsettled, whispering about the sudden lurch earlier, but most had already accepted the turbulence excuse. People wanted normalcy, not fear. It was easier to believe in turbulence than to imagine another plane was actively darting around them. She swallowed hard, realizing the isolation of her situation. She was the only one who had seen enough, pieced together enough, to suspect the truth. And with that realization came another: if the other jet came again, if it forced their plane into a worse maneuver, she might not have time to convince anyone. She needed to act now. But how? She was just a passenger, seat 13F, with no authority, no proof beyond her word. The feeling of helplessness was suffocating, a heavy fog pressing down on her chest. Then the captain's voice returned, softer, firmer this time. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. Everything is under control. We ask that you stay seated. It should have been reassuring. But the way his voice cracked slightly at the edge of the phrase "under control" made her blood run cold. She knew enough about human tone to recognize strain, the forced calm of someone who was trying not to reveal panic. She leaned back, closing her eyes briefly, listening harder. She thought she heard something else behind his words, faint, almost like another voice speaking urgently in the background before the line cut. Her skin prickled. Whatever was happening, the crew knew. They were hiding it from the passengers, maybe to avoid chaos, but they knew. And then it happened, the moment that shattered all illusions. Out of nowhere, the plane dropped sharply, sending screams rippling through the cabin. Trays flipped, drinks splashed, luggage banged against overhead bins. Oxygen masks trembled in their compartments though they didn't fall yet, and a chorus of gasps rose like a wave. She clung to the armrest with white knuckles, her eyes fixed on the window. And there it was. The jet, streaking past at a terrifyingly close distance.